Welcome to the Green Solvents Podcast, brought to you by TBF Environmental Technologies, home of solvents for a green earth. Now, here's your host.
Well, yes, this is your host, Erik Reynolds, and I'm back with Dave Pasin, president of TBF Environmental. And today we're talking with Dave about the differences between bio-based and alternative solvents. Now, before Dave joins us, just as a reminder that if you have questions or require assistance, you can reach Dave at 604-580-1575. Again, that's 604-580-1575. Well, Dave, as always, it's great to be talking with you again today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, Dave, I'm going to have you answer the question for some of us that may be a little ignorant. What does green mean?
It depends what day you have and what interpretation you take, quite frankly. I mean, water is green, but not all water is actually environmentally friendly. So, you have radioactive water and a variety of different interpretations of that. So, green generally, in most cases, is meant that it's more beneficial for the environment. And what gets lost in all this is should be beneficial for to improve the occupational health and safety of the worker. That's often overlooked, but to me, and what our company has strove for over the last in the development of our solvents, one of the things we've been imperative to us is that not only are our products designed to be more beneficial for the environment or increasingly beneficial for the environment, but they have to be able to be beneficial for the worker, so they improve the worker's occupational health and safety and the workplace in general.
Well, then let's talk about the solvents. What is a green solvent?
Well, generally speaking, a green solvent is typically a solvent that does not contain chlorinated compounds or contains no benzene. It doesn't contain hazardous air pollutants, and they're not ozone depleters or ozone creators. Typically, they're not designed or they're not supposed to have deleterious effects on the health of a worker or the end user. Unfortunately, many of the products that are being outlined as green aren't. I'll give you a classic example. One of the issues that is faced all the time is mineral spirits or Varsol or Stoddard solvent, or there's a variety of different names for it. Typical mineral spirits you'd see are called paint thinner. One of the issues is that it usually has a splash point of 105 degrees and it has a very bad odor. So what they'll do is they'll increase the flash point to 150 or 150 degrees, and what they will do is they will deodorize it, so you'll get odorless mineral spirits. And everything. Oh, that's great, except for the fact that it still contains benzene, up to 5% benzene, which is emitted into the atmosphere and can be absorbed into the mucous membranes, eyes, nose, or throat or skin of the user. So it's no safer. It just doesn't have an odor. So you've got to be careful what you look at. And as my wife always tells me, you need to make sure that you read the label and read the material safety data sheet and understand what you're using.
Well, your wife and my wife must be best friends, because my wife's always telling me the exact same thing. Well, Dave, let me ask you about this. What is the environmental footprint?
It's interesting that you'd ask that. Over the last 10 years, 15 years or so, bio-based solvents have been seen as an increasing market and increasing in acceptability in the marketplace. And of course, it sounds really good that you're having a bio-based material replace what would be something from a petrochemical and fossil fuel. So, how bad can that be? Well, it actually has a lot of deleterious effects. Most bio-based solvents come from soy or corn, and they're heavily subsidized by the U.S. government. To give you an idea, the U.S. government subsidizes corn and soy in the United States to the tune of $292.5 billion a year in the form of subsidies. Of that, $84.4 billion goes to corn growers, and $27.8 billion of the subsidy goes to soy growers. And of all that money, only 3.8% farmers get the subsidies. And the people that get the subsidies are generally big agri farmers, such as ConAgra and Cargill. So it gives you an idea that to make it efficient and cost-effective, even though it's still more expensive, bio-based materials are heavily subsidized by government. One of the issues, of course, is that in order to produce and meet demand that the government is mandating for the use of these type of solvents and alternative fuels, they have to plow under more and more agriculture or more land. In fact, the United States has lost over 5 million 5 million acres in the last 10 years That includes wetlands and grasslands that were previously protected. What's happening is that it's actually increasing the CO2 content of the atmosphere, the emissions of CO2 content, as those lands are plowed under to make way for more corn. And of course, then you have situations of you've got millions of pounds of fertilizers and pesticides being sprayed onto those crops to protect them. And in fact, what they're finding now is in the Mississippi River Valley and that kind of area, it's actually flowing down into the Gulf and increasing the dead zone of the Gulf of Mexico. So nothing can grow in that area of the Gulf of Mexico. So it gives you an idea that, the increase in production to produce alternative materials such as ethanol and solvents isn't all it's cracked up to be. One of the other interesting things is they're finding more and more that the emissions that are given off by these particular types of solvents actually contain aldehydes, which are known carcinogens. They also produce more ozone, so they increase ozone. So even though they may not have hazardous air pollutants, they do increase the ozone, which of course causes climate warming or temperature change or climate change, that kind of thing. So there's a variety of deleterious effects that you have. So you have to weigh the uses and their effect. For example, in the biosolvent market, primarily a lot of them are low VOC or VOC, or volatile organic compound emitting products. So what they do is, even though they don't have hazardous air pollutants, they do contribute to smog and other things in other ways. So they're not all safe that they cracked up to be. So the environmental footprint plus their efficacy leads to a variety of questions as to how suitable they are as substitutes, at least in the current market and using the current technology.
Well, you bring up the volatile organic compounds. Now, what are the differences in the VOCs?
Well, to give you an idea, it depends. In Canada it has very different regulations than the United States, and the regulations in the United States vary upon use and industry and material. However, one of the things that's interesting is that whether it's low VOC or a regular VOC, the alternatives still produce emissions into the atmosphere, which can contribute to climate change and smog. While they may be beneficial in that they don't come from fossil fuel, they have other deleterious effects. And in fact, ethanol has been linked to a variety of different ailments in the workplace. And most of the bio-based solvents are based on ethanol, or variations thereof, or ethyl lactate or things like that. So they're not. They do have issues with regards to the workplace. They have issues in terms of their efficacy and what they can be used as and what they can be used for. And those are critical components when you're looking at things. One of the interesting things about bio-based solvents is that in cleaning applications, they tend to be higher cost. They leave residue, which leads to more cleaning steps in the process to clean. And they also can be subject to spoilage and degradation, which is important. One of the major considerations also is their measurement of incremental reactivity. They tend to have higher MIR, or measurement of incremental reactivity. And one of the reasons for that is because they're known to have ozone formers within the compounds that they emit. So those are important considerations when you're looking at it. One of the other interesting things about biosolvents, they tend to be hydrophilic or absorb water. So you have to be careful how they're stored and used in a variety of different applications. So they, because they can do that, they can lead to corrosion. They can have issues with the catalyzation or their ability to function within certain formulas. They can cause reactions within the formula, or flocculation, or kick out, or a variety of different things. So you have to be cautious of what you use and how they're being used.
Well, one last question, Dave. Are there any regulatory issues with bio-based versus alternative solvents?
Well, increasingly, government, I think, gets caught up in the fact that bio-based is good. But you're seeing studies from Stanford and from Italy and from Sweden and Duke that show that ethanol has a variety of issues that need to be addressed, including use of land, crop formation, the use of pesticides, pesticides and fertilizers. And one of the biggest things is the use of water. And what you'll know, I don't know if your listeners will know, but there's actually an aquifer that runs from North Dakota down through Texas. And because of the increase in arable land, or the increase in lands under farming in the last 10 to 15 years, the aquifer, it's massive, has dropped actually a quarter. Scientists are reporting it's dropped a quarter of the amount of water that it has in it. That's massive. And what could happen is you're looking at droughts, which we've seen over the last few years. Of course, then the negative environmental impacts that have, similar to what happened in the 1930s. So you've got to be careful that it looks like a good idea. It's good on one hand, but you have to weigh the consequences on the other. I could tell you that the products that TBF makes are made from byproducts of things like natural gas. So they're used, they do come from fossil fuels, but they are byproducts. So they're used in what would consider to be waste in many cases. So they're made to be efficient and turned into usable product that can be used in a variety of different applications. So when you're looking at what your solvent choices are, you have to look at a variety of different things. You have to look at their efficacy. You have to look at their CO2 input and environmental footprints, and you have to look at what you want to achieve. Do you want to achieve a better product, a safer product, or a product that's better for your worker, or a combination thereof? Those are important things to consider.
Well, Dave, it's been another fascinating conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time again. Now, for our listeners, if you know someone who would benefit from what we've talked about today, go ahead and share this podcast with them. I'm sure they'll thank you for it. Now, of course, you can always visit Dave on his website at www.tbfenvironmental.com. Again, that's www.tbfenvironmental.com. And you can always reach Dave by telephone at 604-580-1575. Again, that's 604-580-1575. Well, Dave, as always, for myself, for the listeners, thanks so much for the conversation today.
Thank you very much. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks for listening. At TBF Environmental Technologies, we manufacture solvents for a green earth. Contact TBF Environmental Technologies today, toll free at 877-658-3681. That's 877-658-3681. And on the web at tbfenvironmental.com. That's www.tbfenvironmental.com.